doing a sew along for one of my new fall patterns, pattern 8221, and we're going to be doing View B. Now, if you're new to sewing or you just need a refresher, make sure and visit the link below and watch the Sewing Basics video where I go over how to pick your pattern size, how to cut your pattern tissue out, how to cut your fabric, and how to read all of the details and instructions that are on your tissue paper. After you're done with that video, then come follow me along in this video. Now make sure that you read the back of the envelope where it gives you all of your fabric options and suggestions along with any notions that you might need. Now let's go over all of the pattern pieces you're going to need. Okay, the first pattern piece that you're going to cut out is pattern piece number 1, which is the front of our dress, and you're going to cut out 2. Make sure that you transfer all of your dots, notches, and markings. Then you're going to cut out pattern piece number 2 on the fold of your fabric, and make sure that you transfer your darts, dots, and markings. You're going to cut out pattern piece number 3, which is the yoke back, and you're only cutting one of these. Then you're going to cut out pattern piece number 4. On the fold, you're going to cut out 2, and this is the under collar. Next, you're going to cut out pattern piece number 6, which is the front facing, and you're going to cut 2 of fabric and 2 of interfacing. Then you're going to cut out pattern piece number 7, which is our sleeve, and you're going to cut out 2. Next, you're going to cut out pattern piece number 9, which is our tie belt, and you're going to cut out 2. And you're going to cut out pattern piece number 10, but only from your pattern piece. You do not need to cut this out of fabric. This is simply a buttonhole guide. Now that you have all of your pattern pieces cut out, make sure that you interface any pieces that need to be interfaced, and now we can start sewing. Okay, I want you to go ahead and grab your front pieces. We're going to go ahead and pin our bust darts first. So I have my dart legs here. I'm making sure that they're aligned on both ends, on both sides. I'm just going to pin through that, and then I'm going to pin again at my dot so I know exactly where I need to stop. Go ahead and pin both your darts that way for the front. And then while we're at it, we'll go ahead and pin out the back. So we're going to do the same thing. You should have your darts marked out. So I'm going to pinch, making sure that my middle dots match up on both sides. And I'll pin. And then I'm going to pin again at the top of my dart and at the bottom of my dart. And you're going to pin both back darts the same way. So go ahead and pin at the center. Make sure your dart legs are matched up. And then pin at the top and at the bottom. I'll set this aside. We're going to go to the sewing machine, and what we're going to do first is we're going to stay stitch our neck edge, which means we're going to sew along the edge of the front neckline on both front pieces, and also on the back of the yoke. So along the neckline, we're going to stay stitch this as well. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and stay stitch first. So I'm gonna stay stitch 3/8 of an inch away from the edge of my neckline. And I'm gonna be using a 3.5 length stitch. And I don't backstitch at the beginning or at the end. You're going to do that for both fronts, and then you're also going to do it for that yoke piece for the back. Once you're done doing all of your stay stitching, we can go ahead and sew our darts. So for my bust dart, I'm going to go back to my 2.5 length stitch, and I am going to backstitch at the beginning of this dart, but I'm not backstitching at the end of the dart. I'm going to sew directly off, and I'm going to pull my threads and then just use these 2 threads to tie a knot. You're going to do the same thing for the other front dart, and you're going to do the same thing for the back dart. Now for the back dart, the only difference for me is I like to start in the middle. And I'm going to backstitch. Do the same thing, sew completely off and pull your threads. And tie those threads in a knot. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my needle back in the center, and I'm going to backstitch and then work my way to the other end. And you're going to do the same thing for the other back dart. Okay, we're going to do some pinning before we go back to our sewing machine. So the first thing we're going to pin together is the yoke to the back. So what I want you to do is, with right sides facing, align your notches. You should have 2 notches on your yoke and 2 notches on your back. And go ahead and pin there first. And then pin at the end. When we get to the sewing machine, we're going to stitch this together using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Go ahead and set this aside. I want you to grab your 2 front pieces, and also with right sides facing, lay them over the top of each other. And we're going to be stitching from the bottom all the way up to this dot that you should have here. So I want you to pin at your dot, that you know that's where we're going to stop, and then pin along the front, and then at the bottom. So when we get to the sewing machine, again, we're going to be stitching from the bottom using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance all the way up to this dot. Now, if you have a serger and you want to finish the raw edges of the front, I would suggest you do that now as opposed to doing it later. For the purpose of the tutorials, I don't do any serging, but just giving you that option. Now go ahead and set this aside. And the last thing we're going to pin together are the facings. So with right sides facing, I want you to lay these over the top of each other. And we're going to be stitching from the bottom of our facing to our dot. So go ahead and pin at the dot, and then pin over here towards the bottom, and there is a notch there, so it should align. Now that we have our back and our yoke pinned together, our 2 fronts and our front facing, we can go ahead and stitch these together. Okay, we're going to go ahead and start with our facings. We're going to stitch from the bottom up to until we reach our dot using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Make sure that you back stitch at the beginning and at the end. You can also finish the edges of your facing if you'd like. Now go ahead and grab your front pieces that we pinned together. And starting also at the bottom, we're going to stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance until we reach our dot. Back stitch. I'll set that aside and go ahead and grab your back and yoke pieces that we pinned together. And using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, we're going to stitch our yoke onto our back. Back stitch at the beginning and at the end. Now we're going to go ahead and press these. Okay, for the front, I want you to go ahead and press this seam open. And I want you to go ahead and press the seam also open on the facing. And then go ahead and grab your front and back and press your seam towards your yoke. Okay, now set the back piece aside. We're not going to use it for just a bit. We're going to go ahead and pin our front facing to our dress. So I'm going to move the top layer out of the way. And then I'm going to place my facing on top of my dress, right side's facing, of course. I'm going to make sure that I'm matching up my double notches. So I'm going to pin there first. And then I'm going to pin at this dot. You should have a dot here that you should have marked. And then I'm going to pin at the top. And then what we're going to do is we're going to start stitching where we stopped stitching before at that dot. We're going to stitch across the bottom. So I'm going to pin here just to keep the bottom together. And then we're going to stitch along the edge. Then we're going to pivot and stitch to this dot. And then we're going to stitch from this dot all the way up. Okay, so I'm going to start at the bottom where we stopped stitching. I'm going to put my needle right at that dot. And you want to make sure that everything else is out of the way. So the other side of the dress is out of the way, the other side of the facing is out of the way, and you're only working on two layers. The layer of your facing and the layer of your dress. And you're going to back stitch. And then I want you to go ahead and pivot. Make sure that you're still 5/8 of an inch away from the edge. Back stitch again. Now I'm going to stop and I'm going to pivot, and I'm going to sew until I get to this dot. Back stitch, pivot, back stitch, you're going to sew your other side of the facing to the dress the same way. Okay, now we're going to snip until we reach our dot, but don't go through your stitching. And then you're going to do the same thing at the bottom. You're going to snip until you reach the dot, but don't go through it. I'm going to cut off some of this excess. And then you can go ahead and turn this out. You can use a point turner if you have one. If there's a lot of bulk, you can go ahead and remove a little bit more of your seam allowance. And you're going to do the same thing to the other side. Go ahead and press your seam. I'm going to press it open. Press your seam open at the bottom if you haven't already. Once you have your corners pushed out, you can go ahead and turn your dress so it's right side facing you so you can see it. And then you can go ahead and press this out. And then go ahead and press out the other side the same way. Once you have it nicely pressed, you can see that it's taken shape now. And then when you lay your other front over the top, it overlaps. So that's where we're gonna have our buttonholes and our buttons, and it's a really nice, clean finish, both on the outside and then of course on the inside as well. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and stitch our shoulders together front to back. So the front is facing me and right side's facing. I'm going to lay the back piece over the top and I'm going to pin my shoulders. Make sure you keep your facing free, don't pin your facing. And you're going to align your notch and then pin the rest of the shoulder. And then you're going to do the same to the other side. Make sure to keep that facing free. Pin. Now we're going to stitch our shoulders together using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, we're going to stitch our shoulders together front to back using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Back stitch at the beginning and at the end. You're going to do the other shoulder the same way. Okay, we're going to go ahead and pin together our under collar. If you're doing a double collar, you're going to sew them the same way. The only difference is you're going to be laying your upper collar on top of your under collar and then stitching it onto the dress. For this tutorial, we're only doing the under collar. So I'm going to go ahead and place them right sides facing, and you should have 2 notches on this side of your collar. So we're pinning along the side and along the curved edge and top. We're leaving this bottom part open. So we're going to go ahead and pin. And when we get to the sewing machine, we're going to stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, starting at the bottom and then going along the top and then along the side. And again, we're going to leave this bottom piece open. And using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, we're going to start on one short end, back stitch, pivot, pivot again, okay, now we can go back to our table. Go ahead and clip the corners of your collar and then go ahead and push your corners out. Move a little bit more. Use your point turner to push out your corners. Okay, I like to press my seams open so I have a crisp edge. And then I like to do the sides as well. Just put your tip of your iron in there, pressing your seams flat. And now give it one more press. And you can go ahead and baste this edge together using the longest stitch your machine has, just to hold them in place when we attach this to our dress. And then I want you to also press your shoulder seams to one side. So press your seam allowances towards the front of your dress. Now we're going to pin our collar to our dress. So the first thing we want to do is we want to pin at the back. So your collar has 2 notches, so we're going to align them. And then you should have a little dot that aligns to your shoulder. We're going to pin. And then you're going to pin your collar to the edge. Okay, and then continue on to the other side. Align your dot to your shoulder. And then pin the edge to the edge. And now we're going to stitch this together using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. If you have some ease that you need to get rid of here, right, we're going to make a couple of clips into the dress, not the collar, so that it spreads with your collar as we're sewing it. So you're going to go ahead and clip into those curves. Okay, so we're going to stitch our collar onto our dress. So we're going to start at the center back, and I'm going to sew from the center back to one front, and then we're going to turn it around and go from the center front to the other side. So go ahead and backstitch, and we're sewing using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Make sure that the dress is laying flat underneath you. You don't want any puckers. And now we're going to turn this to the other side, and you're going to do the same thing. You're going to start at the center, and you're going to work your way to the other end. Backstitch. Now while we're at the machine, I want you to go ahead and turn your facing onto the collar. And go ahead and pin it. And now we're going to stitch through all these layers using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Go ahead and backstitch. And then you're going to do the same thing on the other side. So turn your facing onto your collar. Now we can go back to our table. Go ahead and clip into the corner. Same thing on the other side. And then when you pull your collar out, you get a nice clean finish. Along your collar. Now go ahead and press this all the way around. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and place our buttonhole markings. So what you're going to do is you're going to place your buttonhole guide over the top of the right front, and you're going to put a pin in. This is how I like to do it anyway, where one buttonhole is going to start, and I make a little dot, and then I move it over, and then I make another little dot, and then I continue doing that until I have all of my markings in place. Now you can go ahead and do your buttonholes following the manufacturer's instructions for your particular sewing machine. I'm going to do mine, and my machine is completely different, or can be completely different than yours. So you should follow the instructions in your manual on how to make buttonholes for your machine. Now after you have done your buttonholes, then we're going to go ahead and pin our sides together. Remember, only do this after you have finished making your buttonholes. After you're done, then you can go ahead and pin the entire side seam, matching your notches. And you're going to pin both side seams the same way. Remember, only pin your side seams after you've done your buttonholes. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and stitch our side seams. So starting at the bottom of our dress, we're going to stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Make sure to back stitch at the beginning and at the end. You're going to sew your other side seam the same way. Okay, now for the sleeve, I want you to create 2 rows of basting stitch, starting at 1 notch and then going all the way around and then ending at your other notch. Remember that your basting stitches should be long and that you should not backstitch at the end. Backstitch at the beginning only. And you're going to do 2 rows of basting stitches on both of your sleeves. Once you do that, you're going to fold over, right sides facing, and you're going to match and pin at your notch first, and then pin again along the bottom and along the top, and you're going to do this for both sleeves. Okay, so as you can see, I have my 2 rows of basting stitches, so I'm going to go ahead and sew my sleeves together. I'm going to go back to my normal length stitch of 2.5. Back stitch at the beginning and at the end. And you're going to stitch your other sleeve the same way. Now we can pin our sleeves to our dress. Okay, when you go ahead and turn your sleeve right side out, and you're going to pull your threads. Now you're only gathering enough to ease that sleeve cap in. You don't want any gathers. That's not what we're going after. We just want to make sure that we are taking up some of that ease. And then we're going to pin, and if we need to take out a little more ease, we'll just pull our threads a bit more. So what you're going to do is, with right sides facing, you're going to pin at your underarm seam first, the side seam of your dress to the underarm seam of your sleeve, and you're going to pin, and then you're going to, I'm going to turn this over so I can work from the inside. You're going to pin all of your notches, so you should have notches and dots. You should have 1 notch for the front of your sleeve, so you want to pin there, and then you should have a dot. You want to pin that dot, and then we're going to go ahead and pin at the back of the sleeve where that double notch is, and then find that other dot and pin. And then you can see if you have too much to pull or too much ease on one side, this is actually okay. Then you can go ahead and pull those threads a little bit more. But remember, you're not pulling together, you're pulling just enough to take some of that ease out of the way. Once you have it pinned all the way around, we're going to stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Go ahead and pin both sleeves the same way. I'm going to start at my underarm seam, and we're going to be stitching using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And go slow, make sure you don't have any puckers. You're going to stitch your other sleeve the same exact way. Okay, now once you have both of your sleeves set in, you can go ahead and trim your seam allowance, or you can go ahead and serge it off. And what we're going to do is now we're going to do the hem of our dress. The only things that are left to do is the hem of our dress and the hem of our sleeve, and then also our tie belt. So what I want you to do is I want you to fold and press the given hem allowance all the way around, so it makes it easier for you to sew. So I'm going to go ahead and measure 1 1/4, which is our hem allowance, and I'm going to press. And then I'm going to continue doing that all the way around. You can use your ruler or you can use your seam gauge if you have one of these. These are really handy. You can measure up 1 1/4 and press. And then we're also going to press our sleeve hem. I'm going to also do 1 1/4 for my sleeve. Go ahead and do both sleeves and then set your dress aside. And now what we're going to do is we're going to pin our belt together. So right side's facing. We're going to pin the short end together. And we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Then while at the sewing machine, we're going to fold this over all the way down the length of our tie belt, and we're going to stitch it using 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, leaving a 2-inch opening at the center so that we could turn our tie belt right side out. Okay, let's go ahead and work on our hem. So I'm going to start on one side seam, and I'm actually sewing with right sides facing up because I have it already pressed, so I don't have to worry about making sure that I'm on the edge. I'm going to place the edge of my fabric along the 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then I'm going to move my needle all the way to the far left, and I'm going to stitch all the way around. You're going to do your sleeve hem the same way. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and sew our tie belt together. So using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, now I want you to go ahead and finger press this open. And then we're going to fold it in half. And we're going to use a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now I want you to leave an opening, so back stitch, cut your threads, and then move up, and then go ahead and continue stitching. Okay, now you're going to go back to the center and you're going to start stitching where you stop stitching. Don't close up your opening. Now you're gonna go ahead and turn this right side out through the opening. Okay, so I'm gonna use this pencil that I have handy. I'm just gonna push through. Until I reach the opening. And do the same thing on the other side. Now all you have to do is go ahead and give this a good press, and then to close out the opening in your tie belt, simply stitch close to the edge. And then all that's left to do is for you to give your dress one final press. Make sure and press your hem, and make sure and press your sleeve hem, and then all you need to do is attach your buttons and you are all done. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this sew along. Until next time, peace.